At 7 o'clock, now listen to the words and music of David Bowie.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for, for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the old man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
David Bowie, theatrical, haunting, influential, always a true artist and always interesting. Restless, brilliantly creative, and judged by his many fans as the absolute governor in an ever-changing field of rock and pop music. Yesterday, Sunday the 4th of January 1981, David Bowie ended a very successful season, playing the part of the Elephant Man at the Booth Theatre on Broadway in New York. Now, I was in America for a weekend back in December, and when I arrived, I went to see David's portrayal of the Elephant Man, John Merrick. I didn't know quite what to expect, but Bowie, without special makeup or props, had the audience, and that included me, in the palm of his hand. It was a marvellous performance that made me feel very proud to be British. And before David's afternoon performance on Sunday the 7th of December last year, we sat and chatted for half an hour or so, and we thought that tonight would be a good time to transmit the interview and play a little of his music, especially some from his latest and highly successful album, Scary Monsters. David, can I start by saying thank you very much indeed for taking valuable time, with a capital V, for talking to us. You're a very busy man these days here in New York, I gather.
Yes.
We came along on Friday night to see The Elephant Man, and I must say, in all honesty, I was extremely impressed. I don't know whether I did the right or wrong thing by seeing the film first in London. Mind you, I didn't have much option because you've only done the play here.
Yeah.
Could I get your views on the film and how you felt John Hurt's performance was?
Fortunately, I can't give them to you because I've not seen it.
Really?
And I probably won't see it until I finish my run at the moment on Broadway. I like John Hurt very much indeed. I think I would probably not want to see it, mainly because I wouldn't want to be influenced by anything that he's doing.
So you're saying that that's a deliberate tactic?
And I also like David Lynch's films very much indeed. I like his sort of expressionist thing. Great cult film.
It is a great cult film in London, it is indeed.
Yeah.
How many people have actually played the part on stage here in America? Where do you line up on the list?
I think I'm third.
You're third?
On Broadway, yeah. In the rest of the country, they've had tours out sort of everywhere, so I think altogether there must have been 10 of them up and down the country.
Who was the instigator of you taking the part?
As far as who took responsibility for putting me in? Jack Hopsis, the director.
Yeah. How did it link up? I mean, how did it come about?
Well, he asked me after I was recording in... I'd seen the play in New York, the tail end of last year. And I thought it was a very good play at the time. And then I came back to New York to record the Scary Monsters album.
That's right.
And Hopsis came to see me then and asked me if I'd be interested in taking over the role as Anglin was leaving. I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd certainly like that.
Did you see it as
challenge of it?
Yes, a challenge indeed, a very demanding part. I was interested at the beginning of your performance where you were stood on stage with the nappy on, if we can call it that. It seems to have been called that by most people in the press.
Well, let's call it loincloth then.
Loincloth. Let's
not do as others do.
Let's call it a loincloth. And that sequence where Treves is giving an oration and you suddenly go into that stance, which made me feel terribly sympathetic because that must have been dreadfully painful and probably still is.
I suppose I ought to say that I do lots of exercises and stuff, but I don't because it came very naturally to me. I presume that it was something to do with the mime training that I had earlier. That helped me sort of work those things on a physical level, but I've not had any trouble with my back or anything, really. My hands got very stiff.
I was going to say, I was watching the veins standing out on your hand during the performance.
I've had trouble with that.
It looked like intense pain.
Yeah.
So you're going to do this for how long?
I shall stop on January the 4th. I think after that, if I continue doing it after that, it would seem a bit like factory work. I really just wanted to see what it was like doing a play anywhere, whether it be Broadway or whatever. I mean, there's nothing else on Broadway I would do. Because it's sort of there are a lot of tacky musicals and whatever that I don't really think I'd be very happy about doing. But this thing started off in Denver and Chicago for me, so we didn't know if I was going to get to New York. But for me, it was the idea of doing a straight play which had the greater appeal.
What sort of reaction did you get from the actors? I mean, inevitably, I suppose there must be one or two cynics around.
No, they were great. Everybody.
They've been really good.
Every one of them, yeah.
I mean, did you fear that you would encourage, dare I say, the wrong sort of audience, that the Bowie music fans might come along literally just to see it as a performance and say, well, to hell with the play, but here's David, and that's what matters to us?
Up until first night, yeah. Well, I think everybody, that was the biggest worry, is that what sort of, not about what kind of audience, but what their reaction would be to not, but I think that was a fault of ours in not giving them enough credit that they are responsible. And there's a stupid word. That they were interested in the play. They were concentrated. They really worked on understanding what the play was all about. And I think they enjoyed it. The majority of them have enjoyed it.
Well, I was sat next to a lady who originally came from England who planned her entire holiday round coming here to see you do the play. So that's a bit of an accolade. What about Britain? Because the feeling and the feedback that I've got in Britain from a lot of people I talked to about it before we came was that a lot of people are very sad that it looks as though they will never see you do it in Britain.
Unfortunately, the rights are with another producer and director in England. In fact, it was staged at the... Well, it started in England. The play did start in England. Philip first saw it himself at the Hampstead Theatre Club years ago, when it was first put on with David Schofield, I think it was, in the Merrick role. And it's been on since, I think, at the National with Schofield, but it's been directed in a very different manner. I would love to have done it in England, but there's no way because there are no rights available to do it in England.
How much research did you actually do? I heard a story somewhere that you'd actually been along to the London hospital and taken a personal look at the life of John Merrick. Yeah,
that's the first thing. The whole thing happened so fast when they finally decided to take me as Merrick. I'd forgotten about the whole thing after Hofstede had seen me. But I got a call within 2 weeks of having to go over and start rehearsals. So I couldn't do very much. So I went to the London hospital and went to the museum there. Found the plaster casts that had been made of the bits of Merrick's body that were interesting to the medical profession. And the little church that he'd made, and his cap and his cloak. Nothing much that you can get from that, just a general atmosphere, as you can sort of, feel something from it. I don't know what exactly.
Do you know now what you feel, or do you feel different things on different nights?
Yeah, I find I take a lot of my day on stage with me, depending what the day's been like. If I try and fight the day, I don't think I'm as credible as when I try and incorporate my daily feelings into the role.
I was watching you when you were doing the sequences sat in the bath, and you were still going through the mime actions and picking up the sponge and what have you, and I wonder what was going through your mind, whether it's the same thing every night, whether you're so deeply involved in the part that it is the same thing, or whether you have different thoughts and views.
I don't wonder much. I seem to keep some idea of a stranger being put into a new environment, and I keep on conjuring up new environments, and I try and imagine what it would have been like in different places. I change the stage every night in my mind about what's on stage, and I concentrate on things that aren't really there.
How much involvement did you actually have in the staging? Were you allowed to be?
In my own characterization, the more and more I've been allowed to do exactly the way I want to do it. Again, the precedent was set so well defined by Anglim's original characterization, or I guess I should say Schofield's original characterization, which became Anglim's, which sort of, it's something that's so easily recognizable now. And the photos define the part as well fairly concretely. It's hard to fight the fact that it was his right arm that was longer and the hips were at a particular angle. So the stance is very much an ongoing thing. It's gone through all the characters. But the voice I've changed considerably. I've made him much more of a London voice because I don't have actor's technique to talk in that sort of non-accent manner. So I just bring him back to a very London-type person.
A good cue for me to ask you whether London is still very important to you.
It has been because of Merrick, I think.
Really? Has
That's
that
brought it more.
re-enhanced your interest in your
I don't know about interest.
rather?
I don't. It's not a city that I think I could live in. I still like to go back, but there again, I don't think there is a city that I would be prepared to live in. I'm not sure anymore if I'm a city person.
Do you have an interest, deep in your mind, in freakish phenomena and strange people? Because if we look back down your career musically...
I don't think it's that deep. It's quite up and on the surface, really. Yeah, I certainly am intrigued by people who either have put themselves on the line or are on the line unwittingly or unconsciously have arrived at that situation. But I think that's a sort of a leftover from being a painter. I always painted people and things that were sort of a little sort of corrupted around the edges somehow.
Did that ever worry you? I mean, what were your early influences for doing
Not
that?
really.
Did you feel that you had any?
I didn't really want to... I never thought that I wanted to do pictures or songs about people who are regular guys or regular people. It never appealed to me. There's enough writers and painters who do that kind of stuff anyway.
Did you see Major Tom as being a regular person in the very early days?
I saw him as a person who thought he was a very regular person, but actually put in a situation that he couldn't handle. Would reduce him to something quite extraordinary, where he had no intention of going back to Earth. That was implicit in the song originally. I read the song that it was his intention not to come back, that it wasn't anything to do with ground control or failure on the part of the spaceship.
Is it a song you're still very proud of?
Proud is not really... I don't know about proud. I think it still means a lot to me. I think Major Tom does.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
We'll just take a little break here.
Did you see that as being one of the high points of your career? Because it's, when one looks at it in radio terminology, it's inevitably a piece of music which is going to be played an awful lot, and still is.
I think only that it was the first time I'd been able to create a character that was very credible. I think for any writer, that's a high point. He preceded all the others, and I suppose one has a special place for him. I do, yes.
Nice to hear David Bowie talking again. Incredibly honest man. Let's play that track yet again. It was a hit twice. It's David Bowie and Space Oddity.
Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. 7, 6, commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue and there's nothing
And indeed, Major Tom has come back more recently, hasn't he, with
Ashes to Ashes.
A big success for you in Great Britain, which I hope will please you still.
Yeah.
The British market, the British market, that is. I'm interested to talk to David Bowie in New York. I mean, we're here for a few days, but you're here on a regular basis now.
Yeah.
About
what, in New York?
Well, I mean,
oh no, I'm not.
This is in America and doing a lot of travelling, but you're not in Britain as much as you were.
No,
Do you
America,
still see the British pop market as being terribly important to you?
Firstly, America isn't a place that I come to very often. I'm not that fond of this place either.
Oh, really?
Aren't you fond of anywhere, Barry?
Hope they're not listening next door.
Well, no, it's okay. They know that as well, and they have to live here. I don't mind working here again, but it's a great stimuli as a place to work, but again as a living place, I don't know. I'm not at all sure about habitat, all that, anyway. Never have been.
Naturally nomadic.
But England, what did you ask me about England? I can't remember.
How important you still, if you did, how important was the English market to you now, the fact that you get a number one single?
I think I gave up the idea of markets way back when the whole process of business and selling records for record's sake, and when it became a question of what kind of content do you give an album so it gets higher sales, when that sort of great puzzle came up, and I thought, well, that's defeating the whole point of why I'm writing. It doesn't make any sense, and I wasn't enjoying it. That was around Aladdin Sane period.
That's right.
Just before the Spiders break up, and that was one of the few albums where I put content in to try and accumulate record sales, which was a gross mistake all the way round. I mean, it's just something I didn't want to do. And I found out since, of course.
So at that stage,
then I got quite into the idea of, well, they just have to, take me for what I am, sort of thing. And I stuck with that for
a lot happier to succeed artistically without.
Oh, it's smashing that Scary Monsters has done so well. I'm really pleased. But it wouldn't have amazed me if it hadn't done. Or sort of sold like my albums usually do sell these days.
The incredibly honest David Bowie. You're tuned to Radio 1 on a Monday evening, and it's Andy Peebles, this side of the microphone, being straightened out and battered verbally by the man who I spoke to in New York back in December of last year. We move now to the Scary Monsters album. Drug abuse is something which has riddled the rock business and society in general for a great number of years now, and I wonder whether that had some connection with a song called Ashes to Ashes.
I would never want to be, and have tried not to be, a banner waver for any particular, quote, cause. But I have seen an alarming amount of abuse especially with heroin, and the disastrous effects it has on people. So when I was thinking of how I was going to place Major Tom in this, hence 10 years later on, what would be the complete disillusion with the great dream that was being propounded when they shot him into space 10 years ago and had got such wonderful ideas. This great technology was capable of putting him up there. When he did get up there, he wasn't quite sure why he'd been put there, and we left him there. But now we come to him 10 years later and we find that the whole thing has soured because there was no reason for putting him up there. It was an ego, a technological ego, which got him up there for no specific reason, and just added more disaster because it was a potpourri of technical ideas. And so the most disastrous thing I could think of is that he finds solace only in some kind of heroin-type drug, actually being that the cosmic space itself was feeding him with an addiction, and he wants now to return to the womb from whence he came. It's also a nursery rhyme. It's very much a 1980s nursery rhyme, and I think 1980s nursery rhymes will have a lot to do with the 1880s, 1890s nursery rhymes, which were all rather horrid and had little boys with their ears being cut off and stuff like that. Well, I think that this is we're getting round to that again. I think the idea of the Sesame Street nice nursery rhyme is possibly outdated, unfortunately. Let's hope I'm wrong. I expect I am.
say it's true. They got a message from the action man. I'm happy, hope you're happy too. I've loved all of needed love, saw the details fall away. The shrieking when nothing is given, just pictures of chap girls and synthesis. And I ain't got no money and I ain't got no hands. But I'm hoping to kick because planet is glowing, ashes to ash and funk to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
What about the diversification of interests? Have you found that easy to control? I mean, the fact that you're involved in a stage production here, and yet you still have the inevitable pressure of keeping up the output of music. How have you managed to mix the two, or indeed have you at all?
I think so, in terms of that I don't have managers and stuff and all that. I got rid of all that as well. I just have a couple of people who work with me, and it's much more of a sort of on a real basis. I don't feel like an organisation or anything like that. Some of my contemporaries have got into that position. I think it's an unhappy one to be in. I'm not saying things are perfect, but it feels a lot more real. Yeah, I mean, there's not that much happening that I can't really look after. And the plays in the evenings, I do my writing in the day, and I can paint when I come home from the theatre. So it's all fairly logical.
All fairly logical to the mind of David Bowie, but to us lesser mortals, I would envisage a great strain. Let's move back now to the album Scary Monsters. And I asked David about a track which includes some excellent guitar work from the one-time leader of King Crimson, Bob Fripp. A song called Up the Hill, Backwards.
That's a very odd piece of music because what happens by the end of it is that it actually makes some kind of commitment. But on first hearing, it sounds as though it's a very sort of shrugged, almost cynical, there's nothing we can do about it kind of attitude, which is thrown at you on a very MOR voiced kind of track. So it really sort of sounds like the epitome of indifference. But in fact, I've blocked it from beginning to end with the extraordinary high-energy Fripp quasi-Bo Diddley thing that happens in the beginning and the end, which sort of bookend it and give it another kind of switch. It has far more power than it would at first seem as a commitment. In fact, it has a very strong commitment, but it's disguised in indifference. These are all very personal readings of what I wrote. I mean, it's completely just my own very subjective point of view about them, and I'm more aware than most, I think, that a piece of music, once it's left the writer, really the knowledge of that piece of music ends there, and it becomes public property and is interpreted, and is correctly interpreted by anybody who wishes to hear it. It's like a painting doesn't exist if it's locked up in a room. If it's not seen, is it a painting? Does it exist?
Can I talk to you about your method of songwriting? Because I've read that the Burroughs technique has been something which you've used a lot. We've been here over the weekend. We talked to John Lennon last night. And John was chatting about working with you doing Fame, and I think you did Across the Universe, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
You played a bit of guitar on that.
Yeah.
And he said to me that he was fascinated by your technique of writing and perhaps wished that he'd been able to do that as well.
It's not mine. In fact, it's not really... Burroughs has got all claim to it and deserves it, but I think it was probably instigated by Lewis Carroll. He used to do cut-ups. I found that out only recently, actually.
Can you explain to us what a cut-up is? People might be interested if they haven't heard this before.
If you take some subject matter, take a cup of subject matter.
He's going to do this now.
No, I can't.
We've got a new song.
And you can, you're talking about, what are we talking about? Let's think of a situation. You're thinking, let's go back to the wall. A wall keeps cropping up. So you've got the Berlin Wall, and you've got different episodes happening outside of it. You think somebody trying to jump over the wall. Somebody trying to jump over the wall. Then you write paragraphs. Well, this is what I do anyway. This is only one example. I'd write a paragraph from the jumper's point of view.
Yes.
I'd write the paragraph from an observer's point of view on this side of the wall, and then an observer's point of view on that side of the wall. So you've got 3 different points of view, and then I cut them up and I reshuffle them and I pull them out in 3 or 4 word phrases and put the parts together. And then from that, I can either take exactly what is laid out and utilize that as a new theme, as something, you get some quite original little things coming out of it. 4th points of view, in fact, that one hadn't thought about before. Or I can take it exactly as it reads, or I will then resort it out. There are no rules, there are no ground rules. I mean, it's not as though this is what it is and you're not allowed to deviate from that. Of course, there's no rule system in it. It's a tool of writing, it's a way of writing to promote a new perspective on something that might have got stodgy. I don't use it all the time these days. I used to use it far more. But
are you a quick songwriter when you want to be?
Yeah, very fast. Yeah. I usually complete a song in about, 20 minutes when I get going, but I might take 2 or 3 days building up different ideas and approaches to it. The preface to it takes a lot longer than the actual writing.
Do you often go back deep into your sort of songwriting history and pick up on things again? Because one sometimes meets...
Maybe that is so, but it's not a conscious thing. I think that if one has a particular kind of perspective toward what you're trying to do, it's going to show through all the time. It's going to establish a style. I suppose if there's anything inherent in what I do, there is a style does come through, even though I seem to superficially change such a lot. There's definitely there's some tenuous link that goes through all the work that I do that can be identified as being me or what I've been doing.
If we go back to the days of Ziggy Stardust, I was very much wanting to ask you about fashion, because we, in fact, we did work together in 1972 when you were on tour in Manchester. It was where I first met you.
Yeah.
In the days when you had a very definite image, and the youth of Great Britain certainly seemed to think that the best thing to do was to rush off to the hairdresser and immediately look as near to David Bowie as they possibly could. What sort of feeling did that give you? Was it, when you sat and thought about it privately, a power thing?
I think initially it was very morale boosting. Let's put it that way. I think after a short while, though, it became quite scary to sort of live with that sort of little me's, especially when it got so close to home, and it became something that was real, in as much that there were a lot of people who found out where I lived and looked like me and came in. At those days, I think, then.
Yes.
And that was sort of scary because it seemed to intrude, and I thought, well, I've created the damn thing, that's what you can expect is going to happen. There's not much to
say. As you sit in front of me now, you would appear very much to have shaken off the image. I read in the press...
I hope so.
Yeah, right. But I mean, about New York was that you could walk down the street and not be harassed, that people would say, hello, David, how are you? And you would say, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's something, obviously, that appeals to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the perfect city for that. And Berlin was like that as well. Berlin, even better in a way, because nobody actually talked to you either. Not only did they not recognize you.
You were talking about people sitting in the garden there just a moment ago. Dare I bring the subject up? If we look at your career chronologically, the only odd thing that happened was the reissue of The Laughing Gnome, which is what made me think of gardens.
Yeah.
It's just gone through my mind. Was that difficult to cope with? Because I remember being as guilty as the next man about playing it on the radio.
No, not at all.
The only thing which seemed to go out of sequence, didn't it? Were you pleased about that? I mean, that was the days when people used to say, oh, David Bowie sounds like Anthony Newley.
Oh, I did. I sounded strongly like... I thought he was a great model to sort of try and use that thing. I was most impressed with him because he was the first one that didn't sing in an American accent. I thought that was very sensible. After Gurney Slade, I think that was the thing that registered most with me, was Gurney Slade. That was something so delightful about that whole situation, invoking the things in his own imagination and putting them into a real form. I like that kind of manifestation.
I was walking down the high street when I heard footsteps behind me, and there was a little old man, scarlet and grey, shuffling away. Well, he trotted back to my house, and he sat beside the telly, with his tiny hands on his tummy, chuckling away. laughing all day. Oh, to report you to the gnome office. I'm a laughing gnome and you can't catch me. I'm a laughing gnome and you can't catch me, said the laughing gnome. Well, I gave him roasted toadstools and a glass of dandelion wine. Then I put him on a train to Eastbourne, carried his bag and gave him a fag.
You got a nice boy.
Here, where do you come from?
No man's land.
Oh, really? In the morning, when I woke up, he was sitting on the edge of my bed with his brother whose name was Fred. He brought him along to sing me a song. Oh, I don't hear it. Yeah, what's that clicking noise? I'm a laughing gnome and you can't catch me. I'm a laughing gnome and you can't catch me.
I'm a gnome, anyway.
Haven't you got a gnome to go to?
No, I know that.
Didn't they teach you to get your hair cut at school? You look like a rolling gnome.
Yeah, look at the London School of Economics.
Now they're saying...
We talked about John Lennon a few moments ago and your involvement with Fame. I think you described that as being utter and complete plastic R&B.
That album.
Yes, that album.
Oh, yeah.
Was that a kick against what was going on, basically in America at the time, when everything was hi-hats and four to the bar and very much disco?
Oh, I don't think it was done in the spirit of anger. I thoroughly enjoyed the album. I like the album a lot. I still do. I think it's a very good album. But it was plastic soul. It was something that I was reading from the clubs that I was going to. And there was this new kind of R&B. It wasn't like the R&B I sort of was weaned on as a teenager. It was...
dreadfully manufactured.
It was manufactured, but I didn't dislike it. I didn't dislike it at all. It was quite... it sounded right for the particular year that it was being done in, and it completely took hold of me. And I wanted to produce stuff like that.
Do you spend a lot of time listening to radio in New York? Because I've been here for...
Not now. I think the radio's dreadful over here.
No, that's exactly what I think. It's very soft, isn't it?
Ghastly.
There doesn't seem to be much guts to it.
Yeah, there was one station called WPIX, but they crushed that one as well, and they put it back into top 40 format. There's so little listenable areas for new music over here. It's disastrous. I mean, it's extraordinary that there's so many good bands over here starting to work and trying to do the clubs and coming from these suburbs of New York and whatever. And there's absolutely nowhere that they can get any kind of exposure on the radio.
Anybody from
this land lives by radio and
yes,
TV.
It does indeed, doesn't it?
So if you can't get a hold in there as a creative artist, you've got no chance except keep on playing the small clubs and hoping that you build up a following big enough to carry you to a bigger audience, if you want or need a bigger audience. I don't know about that anymore either.
David Bowie in conversation with me back on Sunday, December the 7th, 1980, ironically and tragically with mention of John Lennon the day before John Lennon was so brutally shot. We move back now to the album Scary Monsters. It's, of course, David's current album, and the hit single from it, Fashion. What were David's views on that song?
When I first started going to discos in New York in the early 70s, there was a sort of a very high-powered enthusiasm, and it had a kind of a natural course about it, which seems now to have been replaced by an insidious, grim determination to be fashionable, as though it's actually a vocation. There's some kind of strange aura about it. I just wanted to sort of capture that feeling in the song Fashion.
They do it over there, but we don't do it here.
people who've come out of the new wave scene in Britain, do you have any favourites?
Yeah, Wire, I like very much indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to like, well, I still do like Joy Division very much.
Yes.
Those two are, I think, my favourite British bands. Well, British-Irish.
British-Irish, exactly. David, where do you go from here? Because as I've said earlier on, there's a great diversification. You're doing all sorts of different things. And I read with horror somewhere, this is only my opinion, that you'd said that you felt video would be a great market for bringing you to your fans without perhaps the necessity of being on stage all the time.
Oh, I don't think I quite put it like that.
Is that a misquote? That's how I interpreted it.
It's a misquote. I know the content. Let's change that around.
Yes, please do.
I don't fancy touring much, to be frank with you.
You're bored with it?
Or it's bored.
Too much
just
hassle?
that facing up to the reality that it's such a demoralising and vegetating situation to have to spend so much time running for aeroplanes, and you can waste 3 months of your life, and life is not that long, you know, and it's these 3 months every year or so. That's a big portion out of it, just to repeat the same show every night. And after the first couple of weeks, unless you're a positive Philistine, I think there's no way that you can still enjoy doing the same show after 2 weeks on the road. So I would rather smash it out for 2 weeks of really, really good shows, but centralise them in major cities and video out into clubs at a lower door admission price. So you get the same amount of people who are able to see the shows at a far cheaper rate. And I would be expending the total amount of energy that I could with enthusiasm just in a short period. It makes a lot more sense to me.
It makes sense, but do you think your public would accept it?
Oh, Christ, I don't care. I mean, I just don't want to tour. I don't see why I should tour, because it's not giving anybody anything anymore for me, because if I can't do it with enthusiasm, it's going to show. Mm-hmm. And there's no way you can manufacture enthusiasm. Well, there are ways, but I don't intend going to do that situation.
Right. I shall be interested to see what David Bowie eventually decides to do. I think it'd be a dreadful shame if we start missing him on stage. He's such a marvellous live performer. Back to the album Scary Monsters, and I asked David what was in his mind when he wrote a song called Teenage Wildlife.
I definitely set out to write an archetype. I've always been impressed with that kind of song, and I've from time to time attempted to write those kinds of songs. I think this is one of the more successful. I'm trying to approach a young mind that is not forearmed to the hypocrisies that he will encounter and the stubbornness to change that people have, and to accept change and to flow with it rather than become reactionary and fight against it, which produces the terrible conflicts that we find around us. It's also a warning for the young man not to develop his arrogance too quickly, because that's self-defeating as well, as we all find out as we get older. Nobody's ever asked me for any advice. They always tell me what to do. And I, of course, always disagree with them because I'm as stubborn as they are.
Teenage Wildlife from the album Scary Monsters, and if you've been listening intently to this program, you'll have heard a very interesting view from David earlier as to the fact that once an artist has created a song, it then becomes public property. And I wonder what you made of a song on the album Scary Monsters called Screams Like a Baby. Well, here's David's view of that composition.
I don't believe in this high-tech society at all. I don't believe it does exist. I think that's a great myth. I think the idea of high-tech songs, high-tech music, computer button, whatever, it's not like that. It's on a very emotional, people level, flesh and blood. One foresees it becoming even more terrifyingly real, anti-tech. The old symbolic street fighting thing probably will not be as symbolic as it was, but will become a reality. One can foresee it in the dreadful 80s. And this is, I guess, one of my... I lapse into this sort of future nostalgia thing often. That can be evidenced by looking at any album I've made, and that particular piece of music it does reflect that. It's writing, taking a past look at something that hasn't actually happened yet.
Like
done The Elephant Man in New York. What do you see yourself doing stage-wise in the future? Is there anything in the pipeline?
Probably, as I say, coming back to Europe at some point to do the minimal tour situation. I would do maybe one south of England thing and one north of England thing, and do that from country to country over a 2-week period, and do the same thing in America.
I mean,
as a commitment that I would still perform, but only in that sort of, under my own regulations about how I'm going to perform, in a restricted kind of area.
I must say it's good to come to New York and meet yourself looking happy and pleased with life, and I think that's the situation, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I'm a bit harassed because this play thing is hard on daily to sort of... I find it hard to kick the part daily, and it's very intense doing the 8 a week. It's not the physical thing either, it's the emotional chronology of what happens to him during the course of the play. It sticks with you during the day, sort of like as though you've sort of covered in apple sauce or something and you've washed it off but it's still sticky.
You do think that when you finished it you will go and see the film and see John Hurt's performance?
I shall go on holiday. Then I'll go and see the film. I think the last thing I want to do when I finish this is go and look at a film of The Elephant Man.
I think you'll enjoy it, though.
I know I will. I know I will.
David, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
That's my pleasure.
Well, if you haven't had a chance to go along and see John Hurt's performance in the movie, do so, because it really is excellent. It's a great shame that you won't get a chance to see David Bowie performing The Elephant Man on stage in Great Britain. Thank you very much indeed for listening to this rather special Monday night program here on Radio 1. Next week at this time, I'll be back with the Doc and Alison for our regular contribution known as Staying Alive. My sincere thanks to David Bowie for taking time out to talk to me. It was indeed a great pleasure to get to talk to the man after quite a long time. My thanks to Doreen Davis for producing the program. From me to you, have a good evening and stand by for Richard Skinner.
Can't say that he's too nice to talk to. Thank you very much indeed, Andy, and Mr. David Bowie.
Richard Skinner.